Good morning. My name is Ann Mavity. I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Housing Partnership, and I want to welcome you to our call today. We are going to start on time, even though I know that we'll have more people signing in as we go. We have over 200 people signed up to participate in this call today, which we're very excited about. So again, welcome to MHP's first call on this kickoff for the 2021 federal and state legislative updates. As a more than 30-year nonprofit, MHP works collaboratively with housing stakeholders across Minnesota, with most of you, to advance policies and investments that ensure everyone has access to affordable housing. Minnesota Housing Partnership hosts these Friday calls to share timely and critical information with housing stakeholders on policy and legislative proposals that impact all of our work in advancing affordable housing. With sessions at the state and federal levels starting this week, we know that those of us who care about housing will need to work hard to continue to make the case for how important it is to ensure that hardworking Minnesotans who still can't afford their housing, folks that are taking care of my mother and educating your kids and delivering all of our takeout dinners, how important it is that everyone has a home. And it also means working to ensure that our housing systems are producing racially equitable outcomes. So we have a stellar lineup of speakers today to help frame the challenges and opportunities we'll be facing in the state legislature and in Congress. MHP's Deputy Policy Director, Libby Murphy, will introduce our state overview this year, and we'll be able to hear from our state housing partners at the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, led by Deputy Commissioner Rachel Robinson, and Jessica Deegan, Director of Federal Affairs, on the administration's agenda. And following that, we will talk with the Democratic and Republican leads on the House Housing Finance and Policy Committee, Representatives Alice Hausman and Theis. But today we'll be starting with MHP's Deputy Executive Director and Director of Policy, Elizabeth Glidden, who is facilitating a conversation with Senator Tina Smith, who we are very grateful, who's sharing her time with us today. She has used her Housing Committee assignment in the Senate to deliver essential and bipartisan housing legislation and improvements. And again, I'm sure Senator Smith can share some of her experiences of this week and what that means for the session ahead. Just as a reminder, make sure that you're muted, and we encourage you to use the chat function to share questions and comments. We'll try to moderate those as we go along. So again, welcome to Senator Smith. Elizabeth, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ann, and welcome everyone. Again, my name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I'm honored to be able to lead into this segment with United States Senator Tina Smith. MHP has increased its federal advocacy in the past year. We have been working with many other partners to influence critical federal housing programs and essential resources and policy. And we're fortunate that Senator Smith will be able to spend some time with us today. I'm going to just dive right in to turning it over to her with just a couple comments to give us an overview of her time restraints. Senator Smith will need to leave us promptly at 9:20. We are going to hear from Senator Smith with some of her reflections on recent events, as well as the coronavirus relief package and omnibus that recently passed, but also some of her thoughts on what are some opportunities and priorities for the future. I invite you to use the chat for comments and questions. We will have some time for questions with Senator Smith until she needs to leave us at 9:20. Also, we are very fortunate to have a wonderful relationship with her staff, and we are joined by Carolyn Hunziker, legislative assistant to the senator, as well as Ben Elgin, who is an outreach representative for the Housing and Banking Committee she sits on. So with that, Senator Smith, we are so grateful that you and your staff are safe, and we welcome you to our program.
Well, thank you so much. I want to make sure I can see everybody there. Oh, now I can see everybody. It's great to see you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Ann, and to all of you. It does my heart good to be with all of you today. Yes, first I just want you to know that that I am certainly safe. My staff is safe. Luckily, my staff has been working almost completely remotely really since March. And so really no one was in the Capitol complex except for one of our staff members who happened to be there in my office doing some tech stuff. And while he was locked down, he was never in harm's way. So let me just, our time together is so precious. I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to talk about the issues that you are so devoted to. But I do just want to note that I think that Wednesday was one of the worst and darkest days in our country's history. It's really only one other time that the capital of the United States has been stormed by insurgents, and that was back at the beginning of the 19th century. To live through that moment and for us to know that that happened, and it was instigated by our very own president, an attack on the legislative branch instigated by the leader of the executive branch, is one of the worst things that I've ever seen in my life. And I think that I'm very focused now on accountability and making sure that that never happens again. I'm very focused on what exactly happened in the Capitol and why it happened. I am deeply saddened by the loss of life that we've seen, particularly the Capitol police officer that was reported was bludgeoned to death and has now died. And of course, there are so many questions about why these armed and violent insurgents were treated so differently than we have seen peaceful protesters, people protesting for racial and social justice, be treated in similar circumstances. So there is much work ahead here. And as I said, I'm quite focused on the accountability that we need, starting certainly with the outgoing president of the United States. It was so strange on Wednesday because we were in the beginning of the day celebrating the realization that with our victories in Georgia, and I'm not being partisan here, I'm just recognizing that with our victories in Georgia, that we would be able to have a majority in the Senate that would help to move forward much more quickly Biden-Harris appointees. And that is, I think, very good news for housing and our shared commitment to making sure that everybody in this country has, and everybody in Minnesota has a safe place to call home. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be meeting with Ann Fudge next week to begin the nomination and confirmation process. And Sherrod Brown and I have already been talking about how eager we are to move expeditiously on that confirmation process with Ann Fudge and with others that come under the purview of the Banking Committee so that President Biden and Vice President Harris can get their people in place as quickly as possible in HUD and in other agencies that are going to be so important to moving forward their agenda and our shared agenda on housing. So that gives me a real sense of optimism in this moment about what we're going to be able to do. I also just want to, I'm glad, thank you, Elizabeth, for making sure that Caroline and Ben were acknowledged. And I want us to be in very close touch over these next few months as we start to think about our housing work in the Senate Banking Committee and with the Biden administration, so that we have like a really open and free-flowing line of communication for the work that we want to be able to do together, because you're going to have ideas for things that we should be pushing forward, bills that we should be introducing, work that we need to do together that is going to be so incredibly helpful as with our partnership is strong. So I want to be sure and keep that going. Certainly, we were able to, at the end of the year with this last minute COVID relief package, accomplish some good things. I would be the first to say that it doesn't go nearly far enough. And my top priority when we come back into session and in the Senate the week of, right immediately after the inauguration on the 20th, will be to do what more we need to do to give Americans relief for the devastation of the public health and economic crisis that they're living through, a crisis that is not affecting everybody the same when it comes to COVID. But this COVID package did include some good things. I'm glad that we were able to extend the eviction moratorium. It is only extended until the 21st of January, so it is not very far. And of course, Minnesota has had an eviction moratorium in place. I know that Governor Walz will be grappling with this in the weeks ahead. And I also know from my conversations with all of you that that eviction moratorium, while it is valuable, doesn't begin to address the challenges that nonprofit housing developers and others have. If they're not getting rent paid, then they are going to be under intense pressure. And this is the long-term housing crisis that I'm so really concerned about. We also were able to extend deadlines for state and tribal and other spending for the original CARES Act funding to 12/21, and that will be helpful, including to Minnesota Housing, because those are the funds that are helping to pay for the coronavirus housing assistance program, and that those funds don't have to be spent right away, I think is going to be very helpful. And then I'm sure many of you know that we were able to also secure additional rental assistance of $25 billion, which will be about $375 million to Minnesota. And we were able to get a permanent 4% floor on that low-income housing tax credit, which is also something that we've talked about amongst this group, and I think that that will also be helpful. I want to just note also, and then I'm going to make sure I don't run out of time here, Elizabeth. I'm really delighted that two pieces of legislation that I led were also passed in the end of year bills, including the Tribal Assistance for Homeless Assistance Act, which will help tribes be eligible for the HUD Homeless Assistance Continuum of Care resources. I'm really delighted that we were able to get that done. And also legislation, the Native American Housing Affordability Act, which will make it easier for folks living on tribal trust land to get access to home mortgages. Those are two pieces of legislation that were directly inspired by conversations that I had during our housing roundtables, including with the roundtables with tribal governments and indigenous folks. So I'm excited that we were able to get that done. As we look towards 2021, I want to just mention a couple of things that I'm going to continue to push on, and then I'll leave a couple of minutes. One is, you may know that I've been working on legislation that would help housing authorities improve their sprinkler systems, and we did not get that done in 2020. We're going to continue working on that. I'm also working on legislation that is called the Mapping Housing Discrimination Act, which is really inspired by the great work here in Minnesota to try to create a true and understandable record about the history of how housing discrimination has limited opportunities and wealth building, and use that as a basis for being able to come up with policies to change that. And so we don't have that bill done yet, but we'll stay in close touch with you on that, and I'm excited about that. And then the ongoing work that we have just more broadly to address the significant shortage of housing all across the continuum, from homeless assistance to supportive housing to low income housing and workforce housing. This is something that Sherrod Brown and I are going to continue to work on really hard. And as I said, I am optimistic, even in this dark moment, about the possibilities for making real progress with the Biden-Harris administration. So thank you so much to all of you. And Elizabeth, I think I saved a little bit of time for questions.
Yes, I think so. So we have a few minutes, and again, I would invite folks to put some questions in the chat. I do see a follow-up to the legislation that you helped get enacted in law on ensuring tribes had access to the continuum of care funding. Sue Watliff Phillips asked whether that is permanent, or was that kind of tied to a one-year? And I guess I would have the same question on the rural housing provision that you helped ensure got into the 20 spending bill, as well as the 21, on ensuring that you could have an up to 20-year housing assistance contract connected to rural housing.
Right. Yes, I didn't mention that. Thank you, Elizabeth. But that's through the USDA. And I mean, Caroline will correct me if I'm wrong, but those are all permanent. They were not part of a COVID relief package. They were part of the end of year, just big bills. Am I right about that, Caroline?
Yes, hi, can you guys hear me?
We
Yeah.
can.
So the tribes are now permanently eligible to apply for participate in the Continuum of Care program. And then the rental assistance provision that you mentioned, Elizabeth, that was in the appropriations part of the bill. So we will have to put that back in the bill every year. But now that we have a bipartisan coalition that supports it, it shouldn't be a new battle every year. It should be easy, but yes, we will have to put that in every year.
So a question that I had, since you talked about some of the priorities for ensuring continued COVID relief, is there has been a lot of attention on the fact that the CDC moratorium extension only was extended for 1 month, and the extreme pressure that is on now to ensure that that can get extended. Do you think with the changes that have happened now in the Senate that will be something that President-elect Biden will be able to move on, and is he willing to move on that immediately?
Well, that you're exactly right about that. I know that this is something that is a big, big priority for President-elect Biden. I'll be talking about this specifically with Ann Fudge when I meet with her next week. I know that they're very aware of this challenge, and you know, as I said at the outset, the COVID relief package that we were finally able to cobble together at the very end of the year left so many things undone, and a few things that were just like barely got us across the finish line, and will then create a whole new set of deadlines, which you know, we'll have to respond to. But I know that this is a big priority for the Biden administration, and I'll bring it up with Ann Fudge immediately when I speak with her.
So you talked about the provision setting the 4% floor for LIHTC that got into this bill at the end of the year. Are you seeing any other active prospects for prioritizing supply of housing, whether that's additional provisions from the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Improvement Act, or other items?
Yeah, well, I will, I'm going to ask Caroline if she wants to answer this question as well. Let me just say generally that you know, one, I'm very aware of how the eviction moratorium, as important as it is putting incredible pressure on housing developers, and especially and including nonprofit housing developers, to be able to even just maintain what we have, let alone expand housing supply, which is so important. So addressing that and figuring out, you know, we have proposals that we've been pushing to try to address that, that in the you know, Sherrod Brown and I and others have been pushing those additional support for rental housing, as well as home ownership, that would address that supply problem in the context of the COVID crisis. And Caroline can tell you a little bit more about that. And I'd like to continue to push to try to get those into future COVID relief packages. And then, you know, then it would be great to be able to think really long term about how we need to address just the significant challenges we have in our housing strategy overall in this country, and the deep disinvestment in housing that has created the crisis that we see in rural areas, in small towns, in big cities, in tribal communities across the board. And that's what I'm hoping that we can start to work proactively on some of these issues. And some of this is, as I think you're getting at, Elizabeth, is work that the federal government has to do in collaboration with state and local governments, and some of it is the work that that for-profit and nonprofit housing developers, you know, can do with the right support and the right incentives and the right structures provided by the federal government. Caroline, do you want to add anything to that?
I would just say that I know one of the things in the Biden-Harris transition plan is a priority of theirs to further expand the low-income housing tax credit. So the bill that you mentioned that the senator supports with Senator Cantwell, that is on their list of priorities. So that's something we continue to support, and establishing that 4% floor was great. But you know, I think there's also an interest in expanding the allocation of credits across states and how they are used in rural areas and urban areas and stuff. So it's probably something we'll continue to talk to the Biden administration about, and I know there's bipartisan interest.
Yeah.
Senator Smith, I know it's 9:20 and I've been instructed. I need to be very careful just to make sure, and I know I interrupted you, I apologize.
Well, that's okay. I wanted to just mention, as I was just quickly looking at the chat that somebody, let me just see, somebody mentioned Ben mentioned the challenges with Section 8 and fully funding Section 8 so that we can address the ongoing challenges there with waiting lists and so forth. And I know that that's a priority for Biden-Harris, and it's certainly a priority for me as well. And we'll work on that. We'll work on that. I feel like this is going to be one of the most important things that we can make real progress on in 2021.
Well, I appreciate that, Senator Smith. I think just to close, I think it'll be, I hope we can continue the conversation about what ends up being kind of the real big vision item or high priority item that is a systems change item that you are interested in prioritizing and working with your colleagues on in the Senate to take advantage of opportunity. With that, I know, again, it's now 9:21, and I want to say,
you're so good.
Thank you so much.
I'm so worried I'm going to be late for the next call, which is with the Ethiopian ambassador to talk about challenges with Minnesotans trying to get back into the country. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm very interested in that big systems conversation and the existence of housing inequality in Minnesota and around the country. To me, this question of housing is all wrapped up in the broad conversation we need to have about income and wealth inequality, and our, a key way that we can address that that inequality as we go forward.
Thank you so very much. And I'm seeing a lot of thank yous in the chat. We will ensure that we get that to you as well. Thank you, Senator Smith.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you all in person, I hope soon.
So as Senator Smith moves on, I just want to thank everyone for putting their comments in the chat. And we will ensure, and I know that Caroline is still part of the program, but that those comments get forwarded to her and her staff. This is a good transition to our next speakers, as we are fortunate to have with us Rachel Robinson, Deputy Commissioner of Minnesota Housing, as well as Jessica Deegan, who leads on federal affairs, to talk about new resources coming to the state of Minnesota and how Minnesota Housing will help ensure that those are implemented as soon as possible. I know there are many questions about this, and also how it compares to the CHAP program and others. Rachel, are you with us?
I believe I have video on and I'm off mute. All right.
There you are. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rachel. And Jessica and I are both here. I know a lot of you are very, very, very interested, in this topic of the new Emergency Rental Assistance Program. We're seeing it called ERA. We already use that acronym elsewhere, but we'll go with it. So in Minnesota, how is this going to work? I think that's the big thing we want to use our 10 minutes for today. And everyone is eager. You do want to hear how it's going to work and when will people get access. We completely understand that, and we are on the same page that the most important thing about this is to celebrate new rental assistance resources, a pretty significant amount of money that is going to be available to people in Minnesota. So I think Jessica was going to put up a couple of the resources in the chat. You'll see them eventually, but if you haven't gone to some of the national summary sites, that's good information that we are using and trusting during this process. The National Council of State Housing Agencies is a great place to get information, and they have a summary, as well as the National Low Income Housing Coalition, where they are diving deeper a bit on the numbers, how much goes to each state. And then the Treasury is the third link that we are looking at quite a bit. The Treasury released a portal. So they have a portal now. You can go to the portal, see their summary of the bill, and then some of the resources that they have available. So what does this mean for Minnesota? According to calculations that we've seen, the state would have access to $375 million of rental assistance. That's a big number. That's very, very exciting. And then keep in mind, in addition to that, independent of any role that we would have as the state government, the tribal nations across the country receive off the top of the federal bill $800 million that they are able to share and have access to. And so we haven't seen any numbers in breakdown. I just checked on the Treasury portal. They have an inactive link where they intend to calculate all of the numbers, state, local government, and tribal nation. So we can try to do the math, but we don't want to say that we're the authority on the math because we are waiting to see the official numbers as well. But again, tribal nations would have access, and then to the state level, 375 million. And from within that 375 million, there are 7 metro counties and cities: Anoka, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, and Washington counties, and the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul that have access to, can access the resources directly. And they can share, we understand, up to 45% of the total that comes at that state level. So those are the numbers. That's how we understand them. And I want to put in perspective that what we know 3 weeks ago is maybe when we first saw the bill language, and then the bill was passed by Congress and was not signed until about 2 weeks ago. And there are some pretty significant differences. It's rental assistance, we'll talk about all the eligibility, but the draft bill had been circulating for a while, and some of the summaries I've noted are still circulating. Good summaries because they were based on the draft language that was out for weeks, but there's a big change. And so the big change from the draft bill to the final bill that we note and are really paying attention to is on timing. The initial bill had almost 2 years to use the resources, and this was a draft, and then the ability to reallocate resources, retain and reallocate within jurisdictions and states. The new bill does not say that. In fact, there's a pretty tight time frame assigned to the resources. So we're in January, and 65% of any grantees, so that's the state's amount that's been drawn down, let's say a local government amount that's been drawn down as we understand it, 65% of those resources are to be obligated or spent in September. Otherwise, Treasury may recapture and reallocate to higher performing, I guess, grantees. We're paying attention to that. That's obviously something we expect advocates to be paying attention to. We do want to spend the money. We want to get the resources out to the people of Minnesota, to the localities, and to our tribal nations. We want to see that happen. But we also need to pay attention to that significant deadline, because that is really different, and it does not allow for retaining resources in the letter of the law. So I do want to make time for questions, because I know that people, again, are just looking for us to say, here's the date when this will launch. But this is not the COVID housing assistance program that we put together and my colleagues that have much more experience with this who led this effort. But this is not that program that we led in 2020 using CARES Act CRF funds. That was the state initiating a program using all the guidance and best practices from across other states and coming up with our own way to spend the CARES Act funds that was available to renters and homeowners who were in arrears. It was different. It was put together in a really, really tight timeline, did get out there, did help people, but this is a federal Treasury program that is much more directed, much more specific. And while we're going to take a lot of lessons from what we did with CARES, we are not just recycling and repurposing the COVID housing assistance program. We are going to coordinate with our local governments. We have a call later today. Work closely to make sure that anything that tribal nations need to be successful that we can provide, we will, and try to design something that works extremely well for Minnesota and for the program requirements. So for those of you who have not read all these summaries, just to be clear, it's rental only. There's some really great things, rental arrears as well as rent forward. So households can reapply every 3 months, up to 12 months. There's an extension possibility. And that is good, because once someone's in the system, we presume that they'd be able to continue processing and stay supported by this program for a longer term, rather than coming back for rent arrears over and over again. So that's good news. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth. I think we're running out of time. So
so I just wanted to make sure we had at least a chance for one question, because we do have from our state panelists some time constraints that they have, and so I apologize.
Yep.
I know that folks are very anxious to hear from Minnesota Housing, more clarity on next steps. I do see a question in the chat from Warren Hansen that I've heard from many other advocates, which is how will deployment look different? What streamlining will be available? And I guess as a companion to that, how will you be engaging with Minnesota community members on ensuring, for whatever flexibility you have post the guidance we think is coming from Treasury, you will have to incorporate this feedback that probably is an outgrowth too of the CHAP program, but now with a different lens with this new emergency rental assistance program.
Yeah, we appreciate that note about engagement. That is absolutely an important component here. And rather than get kind of stuck in any detail, because again, we're not at a place where we're able to say much about the detail, but maybe not the word streamlining, but we don't want to overcomplicate this. We don't want it to be complicated for tenants. We don't want there to be complicated paperwork. We want to maintain, just an aggressive stance on getting the funds to the people who need it. And there's technology, there's program design, there's engagement, there's quite a few steps that we are getting started on. And I know our partners at the local government level and across the country. Fortunately, we're supported by the NCSHA organization and talking to other states and trying to collaborate where we can. But yeah, we've got to get a program together, get it out the door. And that's a pretty significant piece of this. My colleagues are all over the engagement. I'm even getting texts from them. So we love it. And absolutely, we will reach out outside of this short call today.
Do you have a plan to set any more defined period for engagement or message about how to do that?
At this time, no. We are still we're in the soup. And so I just want to be honest with everyone. We are getting guidance and then turning around and, looking for more answers from Treasury. So there's an input process at NCSHA level, at National Low Income Housing is kind of listening to folks, but at the state level, we haven't even gotten that far. So I do want to just be honest with that. Yes, it's important, but we're also already in a ticking clock, and we have to get moving here.
Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate the honesty. I know that we all do, and just want those, whatever communication there is, just to have as much clarity as possible as to how to do that. I know there was a lot of conversation in the chat here, and Jessica was active in responding to that, but we'll make sure that you have all of that as well. So with that, and just in note of the time, I apologize that we need to turn to our next segment, and we thank you so much, Rachel, for being with us. And I will now turn things over to my colleague, Libby Murphy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth, and thanks, Rachel and MHFA. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I want to turn quickly over to our lawmaker guests. We're so excited to have them, and then towards the end, maybe pivot to the state update and overview of our agenda. We're in for a very unique session this year. There are a lot of major issues, including COVID, a 2-year budget, redistricting. And so while last year we had some major successes, we know that there is much more work to be done. And we are very honored today to have Representative Hausman, who is chair of the House Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee, as well as Representative Theis, who is the ranking minority member on that committee, here to discuss some of their priorities for the committee and some of their predictions, as well as take questions from all of you. So please use the chat feature for any questions that you have for our honored guests. And so Representative Hausman, you have been at the legislature since 1989. You're in your 17th term. You have a lot of insight to share. So really excited to hear from you about What are some of your priorities as chair? And then given all of the years of experience you have at the Capitol, what do you think is going to happen? And what do you think is feasible when it comes especially to housing?
Thank you for the invitation to be with you this morning. And I begin by saying thank you for everyone on this phone call. I've been seeing all of the names pop up, the Minnesota Housing Partnership and all of the other guests who are on are doing enormous work, enormous advocacy work and work in housing related issues around the state. And I am very, very grateful that you're there and that we have this wonderful partnership. So I wanted to start there. This is a budget year. And so we will be writing the budget for Minnesota Housing, all of their programmatic issues. And so our first priority then is for all of you to weigh in with our 4 leaders, because here is how we start the budget process. Our leaders give us budget targets, and that's the limit by which we have to write our budget. And when we did this 2 years ago, and they gave us our budget targets, despite all of our rhetoric, the 2 lowest budget targets were for housing and agriculture. And once our 4 leaders give us those targets, that is what, those are the parameters under which we write our budget. So help us get as large a budget target as possible. We perhaps will also revisit bonding, and that is where we do general obligation bonding for public housing, and we do housing infrastructure bonds where we partner with nonprofits. And that partnership is one that I treasure so, because for every dollar of state money, we leverage probably $3 of private money. And that partnership with housing infrastructure bonds and nonprofits has been a very, very helpful tool. By the way, I should just mention one thing. If you heard as they talked about the federal money, it's a fairly large amount, but it is only for renters. It is not for homeowners. My guess is as a result that the state may have to lean more heavily in the direction of helping homeowners, since that federal money is specifically for rental only. I'm sure that we will spend a lot of time yet again on the issue of the eviction moratorium and housing assistance. When this pandemic first started, both the state and the federal government knew that all those people who lost their jobs, they were at bars and restaurants and retail, at the very level, a salary level that is probably the most vulnerable. They're one paycheck away from not being able to pay their housing costs. And so we very quickly knew that we needed to work on housing assistance to protect renters and landlords. That's the group that we don't want any more homeless people, and we don't want them to lose their the place that they're living. And so we just spent a lot of time on the whole issue of the moratorium. We don't want there to be a cliff at which they owe a lot of money and then are evicted. And so those are the kinds of challenges I think we're looking at. I think the theme, excuse me, excuse me, the themes that Minnesota Housing and the Coalition on Housing use are shelters save lives, housing ends homelessness. So we know that we have one issue around shelters, the encampments for the summer. I'm sorry, just clearing my voice here. When staff people have gone to the encampments in the parks to move people into shelter, it's a big challenge for them. People don't want to go into shelters. So that's a policy question that we have to talk about. What are the issues around shelters? We know the rules. You have to leave in the morning. You have to be in at a certain time at night. You can't leave your property there. There are a number of rules around which people are hesitant to move into shelters. And so I think there's some policy work that we need to do. we know that nothing else in life goes well if you don't have a safe place to sleep at night. And so getting that immediate issue of shelters resolved. But we also know that permanent housing is still the goal. And with supportive services, permanent supportive housing is still the goal. 1 in 5 live in poverty. Income inequality is still a driver here.
Thank you, Representative Hausman. I'm sorry to interrupt there, but I do want to give Representative Theis, our other guest speaker, an opportunity to talk about some of her priorities as the ranking minority member on the committee, and then we'll turn it over to questions. And I have a lot of questions for you, so, and I, again, use the chat feature. Representative Theis, you are in your 5th term, so you also have a lot of insight to share with us today. And the same question to you in terms of what are your top priorities for session and any predictions about what's going to happen in regards to housing?
Thank you, Libby. It's really nice to be here. It doesn't seem like it's been that long that we were together last time, but it certainly has been. I'm from the St. Cloud area, and my husband and I had a building remodeling company for 30 years, and now the company that we have is home inspections. So housing has always been a part of what we've done since we've been grown-ups. I'm very pleased, first of all, to see that Joe Nathan is talking about all the work that students are doing in building homes and the opportunities we have there. St. Cloud Tech also does a student build. They call it Tiger Build. And the houses are sold and used. And quite frankly, I think that's one of the ways we get to affordable housing. Joe had stated in his comments in the chat that they can build a house for 100 grand. It's really hard for a builder to do an entry-level home for that amount. There's just so many different costs. And usually we see that when interest rates are lower, materials are higher. And right now they are pretty high. So when we see higher interest rates, the materials are typically a little bit more cost effective. So right now it's a difficult time for a lot of folks in building that, and there's the shortage of workers. I hear that from all my friends. They can't find anybody to work. So it's going to be a very big challenge to figure out how we do affordable housing. One of the documents I really like is the governor's task force on housing, and using some of those things. I think in order to be able to build entry-level homes, we need to really get our municipalities on board, all the agencies on board, and say, we really have to get serious about what the costs are, because sometimes they are incredible. In Sartell, several years ago, there was a big apartment complex that went up, and the building permit alone was $1 million. That's before the shovel even hit the dirt. And they were able to put the building up. The rents were very doable for a lot of folks. And he got a lot of folks renting there that he hadn't expected. It wasn't a senior living facility, but they had a lot of folks, seniors that were moving in, and that wasn't their target. But he was able to still build and do a very nice building at a reasonable rate. And I think we need to start looking back at that again. What do we need to do? It needs to start from the beginning. But I like a lot of the things that the task force came up with. And I'm hoping that we can look seriously at that and really decide, how do we get back to a cheaper, not a cheaper home, more effective home. We have a lot of homes that go up here in St. Cloud, Habitat for Humanity, and I know sometimes they struggle with the cost. But there's nothing more delightful than to see the families when they do the ceremony to turn the house over. And they are so full of joy, and the children are so excited, and it's just very heartwarming. And we need to figure out, how do we do that better? And I think we also need to look at some tiny homes, little homes. Our technical college also built a tiny home, and I think we need to look at that for some entry level. I know that there's some communities, some states that have used these tiny homes to build some really nice developments for vets. They are so excited to be able to have that place called home. And I think that's something we need to look at. I think it is very doable. We've got manufacturing housing. I sometimes get criticized from my colleagues for, why are you talking about manufactured homes? And it's like, but we can't build them. We can't build them like that and for that amount. So I think it's something we need to talk more about and see what we can do with that, and maybe look at some developments again and making sure that we're keeping that cost low. Something that's really dear to me is I love that Minnesota also had some legislation that recognizes that students, kids who live in homes do better in school. We need to make that happen. We need our students to do better. And if we need to find homes for them, then we need to figure out what that means. But I very much support that. Young families need to be in homes. The kids need the stability. They need to have that family unit together, to have everybody on the same page helping them out. And with that, I would like us to go to questions to see what's on everybody's mind. So thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity again. And it's nice to see Chair Hausman.
Yes.
Well, thank you both. One thing I wanted to open with is, so we had Minnesota Housing on and Senator Smith talking about the federal package. What will be the role in the legislature in the rollout of those federal funds, if any? And then additionally, Representative Hausman, you have introduced a bill that would appropriate an additional $50 million to address some of the gaps that Minnesota Housing acknowledged in the federal funds. And so can you just talk a little bit about your role in the funds that are coming through the federal government, as well as your role in assessing what the legislature needs to do that the federal government isn't doing?
What the federal government did that we did not is they are saying federal is for rental only. We very specifically said last year when we did the 100 million that it was for renters and homeowners. We had a more broad way of helping people. So because the federal dollars are rental only, it does mean, I think, that we will probably have to concentrate a bit more on homeownership, because that is not helped at all by the federal dollars. That would be, and again, we haven't started any of this conversation. Just a couple of follow-ups to Representative Theis. She referenced our concern about children who need a place to live. The University of Minnesota did research some years ago. By the time a child reaches 5th grade, if they've been homeless or highly mobile, they're achieving at the level of a 2nd grader. And so that's our motivation. All of these interconnections, the gaps in education achievement, we have to I think, seriously look at those as we set housing policy as well. And then she also referenced the need for different housing models. I really feel so strongly about this. The tiny house is one of those. The other, and I think there's one of these in Minneapolis, I haven't gone to visit yet, going back to the concept of the rooming house, where you have your own bedroom and bathroom, so you've got privacy and protection at the time of a pandemic, but you share the public neutral spaces. I think one of the advantages of that model is you live in community. You don't live in isolation, which is, I think, right now, the apartment buildings that we have, there's a certain amount of isolation. So different housing models, I think, is something we have to keep thinking about as well.
Representative Theis, you brought up the need to work with local municipalities, and you were specifically talking about looking at things that are driving costs. But I want to ask you about local housing trust funds. This is legislation that you have co-authored, you and Representative Hausman, over the past several years. I know that the budget, we have an unexpected surplus. And so what do you think might be the likelihood of a local housing trust fund state match to help incentivize local communities to start putting money to dedicate for affordable housing and really working at the local level on some initiatives that could get to tiny homes, could support manufactured housing, and some of the things that you've talked about?
I'm always optimistic, but I'm really optimistic that we're going to start understanding that when housing does well, the economy does well. That's just the way it works. And I think having the stability is where it's at. So looking at these trusts, I think, is a wonderful opportunity. And we need to really look out of the box. We can't just keep doing what we have been doing. And I'm always, you know, let's take a chance on it and work it out. And quite frankly, not make it so complicated that it doesn't work for everybody. We need to have it very basic. So I'm excited about it. I think it's a good way to go. I really didn't know a lot about trusts until the last couple of years, but you know, I think it just makes a lot of sense. We need to start doing out of the box things because what we have been doing isn't necessarily working. And I want to see, really, the kids they have my heart. I want to see the kids do the best that they can. There are next folks that are going to take over this. And if we show them that we're willing to do some different things, that it's okay to do that. I'm really excited, and I really am excited because it fits a lot of different folks to see some communities. I think it was in Kansas that does the tiny homes and the neighborhoods, just to see the excitement on everybody's face. If we can do that with land trusts, then we need to do it. I'm on board.
Great. Well, I'll come around for that signature on the bill again.
Okay.
So there's I do want to get to what both of your perspectives are going to be on divided legislature, but first, Joanna has a very specific question about what funding is there to help people who are living on social, on SSI, working with families with disabilities. Anything in the emergency housing assistance package that you're thinking about, Representative Hausman, or any other bills that you're aware of?
I think now we're just beginning to see the bill introductions just started on Thursday, so we don't really have a sense yet of who's bringing an issue like that forward this year. It's certainly on my radar screen as something that we have to be concerned about. I'm seeing just tons of good ideas in the chat room, by the way. I hope you capture all of those and send them on to us, because there is just there's a lot of knowledge on this call today, and so I hope we capture all of that in the chat room. One of them, for example, we talked about tiny houses, but there is one person on this call who is very concerned about the fact that we don't have apartments for 3 and 4 bedrooms for larger families. Our immigrant communities still have larger families, and that's a need. So we don't want to overlook that issue. By the way, Deegan is the nonprofit that has focused on that. They are intentionally building housing with 3 and 4 bedrooms, and so that's another niche I think that we have to acknowledge that is needed.
Mm-hmm. And then another question from Dominic McQuarrie about the landlord risk mitigation fund, and that kind of brings us to the issue of the eviction moratorium. This is something that is very important to Minnesota Housing Partnership, making sure that people have stable housing amidst the pandemic and the recession and the loss of income that they've been experiencing. Governor Walz did write to lawmakers that as part of ending the peacetime emergency, he would need to see legislation to address the eviction moratorium. Part of that could include a landlord risk mitigation fund or some sort, but can you speak to your perspective on what needs to happen in order to get to a place where that the governor can get on board with you as lawmakers?
Do you want to hear from Tama first, or?
Sure. And we only have a few minutes, so.
You know what I think we need to do is just be very dedicated to what we're doing, very open to the ideas and challenges. Housing, I don't see it as a partisan issue, and I'm really glad to be on this committee because of that. Housing just works, and you know, I'm looking at so many of the comments too. We have a large Somali population, and it is a big problem. And I know some people are saying tiny homes don't house families, but I think we need to look at how do we start. Once we get a person into a home and get them going, how do we keep them going up the ladder? And that's what I'm looking at in many cases. But I think working with the governor, just being very sincere and very honest about what I think my ideas are, what we think the community's ideas are, looking at what works, what doesn't, but also not being afraid to try something different. And I'm excited for the conversation. I think we're going to have some really great ideas, and I look forward to it.
And you asked about the divided legislature. We are now the only divided legislature in the country, and Washington isn't even divided anymore. And that requires then for something like this for us to be bipartisan. And the housing advocates and Homes for All have really helped us, I think, in that regard by reaching out to everyone and assuring that when we have the housing conversation, it is always on a bipartisan basis. And that's going to be really essential again this year.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for joining us. You've both worked closely with Minnesota Housing Partnership and housing advocates on many issues for the past several years. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's been very informative, and we will pass on the chat because there's additional questions. I'm happy to facilitate that communication. I've limited my time to talking about MHP's agenda because I want to make sure that I turn it back over to Ann, but you've brought up many issues that are going to be of utmost importance to MHP as we think about this legislative session. Priorities including housing stability, making sure that there is enough housing assistance for folks to maintain their housing. Tenant protections will be something on our radar, including source of income discrimination, which was brought up in the chat, making sure that people have access and opportunity and can access the affordable housing that is out there and the resources that are available to them. And then, of course, preservation and production. We need more housing and we need to save. We look forward to working with you on those things. And then with that, I will turn it back over to Ann Mavity, our Executive Director.
Thank you so much, Libby. And for all of our speakers today, I am so grateful for the speakers today. I feel like these are the conversations that are straightforward and clear. And I'm also grateful for my brilliant colleagues, Libby Murphy and Elizabeth Glidden, who have helped facilitate this as well. Great insights, great information. MHP will continue to share information and help keep you informed as we go along with these legislative sessions. And if you have suggestions for speakers and topics, please reach out to Libby or Elizabeth or myself so that we can help tee that up through the session. Our next call will be on Friday, January 22nd, and we're going to target every 2 weeks. That's our goal from here on out, so look for more information on that. You know, Representative Theis was mentioning that she doesn't see housing as a partisan issue, and I would agree. I think housing has a special role to play in bridging these political divides that are framing so much of the public discourse of late. And you know, housing remains so fundamental to human dignity, to our basic needs, to educational outcomes, as we were talking about, to building strong economies with healthy workers. We have this in common. Every night, everyone needs to go home and rest to prepare for whatever the next day brings. I'll just note that, you know, like many of you, I was watching breathlessly this week as events in Washington were unfolding. I was grateful that our guest today, Senator Tina Smith and her staff, and really that they weren't harmed. And I was impressed that she remains hard at work on housing. And as someone myself who worked in DC for the House of Representatives on the Housing Subcommittee for 3 years, many years ago, you know, I contrast my experience back then in working across the aisle for weeks and months on housing bills. And then when we completed the housing bills and we were exhausted, we'd all go out together for a drink to toast our good work together, Democrats and Republicans. And as hard fought as our negotiations are on the bills, we saw each other as colleagues, not as enemies. And I think that that's what I'm hearing also from our legislative leaders, that as we're leaning into this work, into these new legislative sessions that are begun, we need to stay grounded on why we're doing this work. We need to stay grounded on how do we fix decades of racist housing policy, how do we ensure our economy has a strong foundation to grow and provide opportunities for everyone to thrive. Representative Theis was talking about how important housing is for our children, for educational success, one of many examples. So again, thank you for all the work all of you are doing. I remind you to go to mhponline.org, sign up for our newsletters if you haven't, share it with your colleagues. We'll help connect these conversations and communities wide and far throughout these sessions, and we appreciate all the work you're all doing. So thank you again to our speakers and to all of you. See you in 2 weeks.